So 40 months ago, the Fed began its fastest rate hike cycle in modern history when Bitcoin was just $42,000. And now it's $117,000, up over 167%, while rates went from 0% to over 5%, now resting at 4.5%. That performance shatters the narrative that Bitcoin is a low interest rate phenomenon. If that were true, Bitcoin should have collapsed during this tightening cycle. You could see right here, of course, from 2020 to 2021, Bitcoin did very well when rates went down to zero. But as they have climbed during this fastest rate hiking period in history, Bitcoin has grown to the fifth largest asset on Earth at a $2.4 trillion market cap. It went from $3,000 at the start of the last zero interest rate policy period in March 2020 to $117,000 today, as the Fed's neutral rate has climbed to 4.5%. That's a 4,000% increase during one of the most hawkish monetary pivots in history. Bitcoin is not a byproduct of easy money. It is the apex response to broken money. And now we're staring down the next chapter in that story. Just this week, House Speaker Mike Johnson said the Fed should cut rates even though the economy is running hot. But this isn't just political posturing, it's coordinated. Former Fed Governor Kevin Warsh is now publicly calling for a new accord between the Fed and Treasury. That means coordinating interest rate policy and balance sheet strategy to make for easier rate cuts and use Fed policy to manage the fiscal burden as interest payments now exceed $1 trillion a year. What that translates to is a U.S. Treasury that can determine the level of interest rates on the money that it is borrowing, effectively slamming rates down to as low as it possibly can to erode the value of the money that it's paying bondholders back with. And Trump is already ramping up a campaign to oust Jerome Powell, not by firing him outright, which he can't do, but by relentlessly criticizing him in public. He wants a Fed that answers to the White House. And that's a direct challenge to the 1951 Treasury-Fed Accord, which formally separated monetary and fiscal power. If Trump appointees like Warsh or Judy Shelton take over and begin openly coordinating with Treasury, cutting rates to juice markets or ease the debt burden, that's the end of Fed independence. Markets will see through it immediately. Bond markets will demand higher yields, inflation risks will reignite, and the dollar, already under pressure, will face a global confidence crisis. This is how fiat systems die, when monetary policy becomes political policy, when printing becomes permanent, and when the dollar becomes a tool and not a standard. In that world, Bitcoin doesn't just thrive, it becomes the only escape hatch. And we've seen it before. The last time rates were slammed to zero in 2020, again, Bitcoin surged from $3,000 to $69,000, a 2,200% gain. And now at $117,000, even a fraction of that move, if rates were to slam back down to zero again, would take Bitcoin to over $700,000. If we go full debt monetization and rate suppression, there frankly is no ceiling. We're entering a brand new monetary era, a $36 trillion national debt and climbing a $1 trillion a year interest bill. Bitcoin is the asset of that future. Not because it's speculative, but because it's outside the system. It is incorruptible monetary policy. It's the apex hedge against perpetual and accelerating monetary debasement. And in a world where every lever is pulled to devalue the dollar, that might be the most valuable trade on earth. That's all for today's video. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed, make sure to follow and, of course, reshare for more. And check out Horizon. Horizon lets you stack Bitcoin using your home equity without debt, monthly payments, interest, or term limits. You can check that out at joinhorizon.com or by scanning the QR code right there. That's all for today's video. Thank you so much for watching. I'll talk to you soon.